Well, hey, Trinity Hall, how is everybody feeling tonight? There's a couple of us here. I said, how are you feeling tonight? All right, there you go. Well, welcome to Pub Theology, our final night of Pub Theology. If you're just joining us, you're like, what is Pub Theology? Pub Theology is an event where we explore a thought-provoking topic that deals with faith in a comfortable environment, in a place where everybody knows your name, all right? Now, speaking of which, I heard that on Netflix, there is a skip intro button on the Cheers theme song. What kind of monster wants to skip the intro of Cheers? I have no idea. But we're glad you're here tonight. My name is Justin. I'm your friendly neighborhood MC for the evening. So we're excited that you're here. A couple of things before we get started. You have not only come to hear a conversation about a topic of faith, but also you have come to one of the most amazing raffles in Dallas, Texas. And I want to draw your attention to this little sheet of paper right here. This piece of paper you will fill out and put into a basket whenever our break comes, intermission, in just a little while, where you will have the chance to win a $50 gift card to Trinity Hall. There you go. This piece of paper right here, thank you for letting me borrow that, by the way. This will be a sheet of paper that you will put a question that you have for our speaker tonight. And whenever we have our intermission, they will go through these questions one by one, and then we'll answer as many of them as they can in the allotted time during our Q&A time. So you want to hang on to that. Okay, well, as we go forward, I'd like to introduce Bob Johnston to you, who will introduce our speaker and our topic tonight. So give it up for Bob Johnston.
Yeah, thanks, Justin. Appreciate it. I'd like to do an introduction tonight of both, just a few words about our topic, and then I'll introduce our speaker. Because tonight is a little bit of a different topic in that it is a topic that for many involves a little bit of controversy. So I want to say just a few things about that. We're actually happy for that, because part of what we want to do is have a place where we can have the freedom to have some discussions and some thoughts and hear things from different kinds of angles. So I'm happy that we're having that. But I was reminded last night that that it is, for some people, a very emotional topic where it is. I had the late service at our church last night, and you know, as a preacher, pastor, you're always a little worried when you see one person circling to be the last one through the line. This was that person, and they came up to me after, because we'd done an announcement about it, and they came up to me at the end and then said, what does this mean about St. Michael's? Does this mean that we have the exact official position as Wilshire, and are we doing this and all that going? And I'm like, hold on, where did you get all that? You know, the diocese has an official position. I think, as far as I know, our official position is we're a big tent that's going to love everybody that comes in our place. But I don't know that there's any official, position like that. And so anyway, we kind of got that all resolved. But part of our belief that I will say is, we believe that God gave us brains, not as a liability, but as a gift, and invites us to use them. And so it's a great opportunity to have conversations and dialogue around issues that are at least controversial in the church. I don't know that it is for others, but at least controversial at times in the church. And I want to tell you one story really quickly on this, because it's the weirdest talk I ever gave in my life. Was on point, because many years ago, after being requested for many years to do it, I gave a talk on this topic in a pub. And the way I did it that night was I had them set up 3 microphones. We had a pro microphone, a con microphone, and a neutral microphone for the questions. And I, sort of putting on my lawyer hat, said I'm going to argue as hard as I can from each of these mics, and then we'll hit the questions. And I did that. And what was weird, when the talk was over, I went over to the table with all my friends who were supportive of the gay position, and they were like, fantastic talk, great talk, wonderful. And I went over to the table of my friends who have the opposite pole, and they were like, oh, great talk, wonderful, wonderful. And as I talked to them, both groups later in the night, it was clear to me neither side had listened to the other side. And all they had done was listen enough to try to validate their own belief system. That was it. So my encouragement to you is, wherever you are on this, try to go a little further with this. And our speaker tonight is somebody who has been on both sides of this thing. So you're going to get some angles from coming at it. You'll hear about the journey. So I think the part of the deal is just to be open to listen to that. And there are a couple more things I want to say on it just really quickly, because we are a room where there are people in this room who have differing views on this issue. That's just a fact. And two things I want to say before I do the introduction is, one, if you want more resources after tonight, I'm sure that if George doesn't mention any during his talk, that during Q&A you can ask him, because they've studied it. His church has studied it. He's studied it. There's been a lot of study. He could probably give resources on it. I'm going to mention two on both ends. On the one side, sort of the long-standing traditional view in the church, you would go look at the Bishop of Diocese of Dallas has written a paper, 60-something pages, on the diocesan website. You can go get that view. And I think the best little primer on the other side is Matthew Vine's book, God and the Gay Christian. So just two references I'll throw out there on that side. And the final point on this with the diversion, and we have people in here in all phases of spiritual journeys, people who don't believe, people who do believe, all these kinds of things. My final word on the topic tonight is just really for the Christians in the room, that even as we disagree, we're meant to be marked by love. And so anytime we have a discussion that can get down the middle things, I think it's good to remind us that ultimately we should be known by love, and that should be above everything else. So I'm going to put that out there. Now I want to get on to the fun stuff of introducing our speaker tonight, the Reverend Dr. George Mason. And I have to begin by telling you that, of all the people I've ever met in my life, I've never met anybody better with names than George Mason. And this is a true story, that I have an identical twin brother who attended his church for 4 years while he was in medical school, and then he went off to do his surgery residency and all this other stuff. And George hadn't seen that guy in 6 or 7 years, and he came over to the church I used to be at to speak one time, and I met him back in the sacristy, and I said, "Hi, I'm Bob Johnston. I may look familiar to you because my twin brother," and he said, "Stuart." And I thought, oh my gosh, I can't remember the guy I met yesterday around the corner, and he's got 8 years ago, my twin brother and all this, and just nailed it. And so then it didn't end there, because later on, I'm at a party somewhere, and I'm telling this story. It came up somehow, and I'm telling this story. And the guy I'm talking to says, "Yeah, I've been to 2 funerals over at Wilshire, and he knows my name." So I think I think he must have an incredible gift with names. But anyway, he's been the senior pastor over at Wilshire Baptist for more than 30 years. He has been a leader in the church in lots of different capacities. The Cooperation Baptist Fellowship, the New Baptist Covenant at Duke Divinity. He's writes frequently for the local newspapers in the area. He has been doing some groundbreaking work in setting up internships and helping people working through vocations, some things that have really been models for the rest of the church. Let me a little bit about his educational background. He went to the University of Miami, where he was the quarterback there. He did his Master's of Divinity and his PhD at Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary in Fort Worth. His PhD focus was in systematic theology and also a bit of a focus on the philosophy of religion. Would you join me in welcoming George Mason? Thanks,
buddy. Man, this is a great room. Thank you so much for coming. So let's just try to pause for a moment and think about what this is, right? The Baptist preacher has a beer in his hand, right? At a pub, talking about the subject of homosexuality, right, with Episcopalians sponsoring this. This is like the kingdom of God. Right? What's not to like about this? Okay, so, and thank you. So many of you are my friends already that I know, and others of you, I know there'll be a test on names now by the time I leave, but anyway, thanks, Bob, for the nice introduction. So the idea here is for me to talk for a while, and then we're going to take a break, and you can write questions and give them to Bob, and then I'll come back and take some of those questions, and then we'll be finished for the night. And I decided not to script this thing, so therefore I'll probably do more stream of consciousness stuff. But my thought is I'll tell you a little bit about my own journey about this, and then where our church has been, talk a little bit about how we might think about this with relationship to the Bible and whatnot, and then we'll see where you want to go with it. All right? So, I grew up in New York City, in Staten Island, and I was sort of one of those odd people that grew up with one foot in the main line and one foot in the evangelical world. So I kind of grew up knowing my creeds and singing my German hymns in my Lutheran tradition, and then also learning my gospel songs and believing everybody was going to hell who didn't believe like me. So that was sort of, it was sort of a tough thing to navigate when you were growing up. And I guess most of my life, I kind of have struggled to straddle the line between those two traditions, because the truth of the matter is that, American Christianity is not so much divided by denominations like Baptist and Methodist and Episcopal and Presbyterian as much as it is by this more or less worldview that you could say is more mainline versus evangelical at this point. And we struggle with that in all of our denominations. But mostly I was formed around, in the evangelical side of it, the idea that, you had to, every opinion you had to be shaped and formed by the Bible. And you really couldn't think much beyond whatever seemed obviously to be a verse that said this. That was just the way you understood how truth was to be delivered to you. Obviously, that made you somewhat skeptical about other discoveries of truth and things like science and the like, but nonetheless, especially in moral matters, you would turn to the Bible and simply read it, and then essentially you were finished at that point, because you read what it said and then you stopped thinking, because that did your thinking for you. On the other side, in my more mainline tradition, and so I'm like this divided self, right? I realized that, God loves everybody, and that Jesus welcomed everyone, and so trying to put together this sort of difficult connection between these two traditions was actually part of the story of my life, I suppose you might say. And so all along the way, I have felt that somehow the gospel has to be good news for everybody, okay? Somehow it has to be that, or else why do we call it the good news? On the other hand, I always felt that I had to somehow justify that by Scripture, or else I was just putting my own desires into play and trying to make things be what I wanted them to be. So that's been the struggle of both my personal and professional life. And as a Baptist who started out a Southern Baptist, I was much more schooled in this point of view of evangelicalism, you might say, and this other tradition nagged at me, okay? So through the years, I tried to put those things together. In our own church, I've been here nearly 30 years, but Wilshire is a little different kind of Baptist church. I think we should actually also pause to note that when Bob introduced me, he said somebody at St. Michael's was worried that they might actually have a position as liberal as the Baptist church. Could we all just realize what just happened there, right? I mean, really, what a strange time this is. But anyway, over the years, our church has actually taken positions on things that have been outside of the norm of Southern Baptist life. And one of the ways you could say that is that we actually left the Southern Baptist Convention 27 years ago and helped to form the Cooperative Baptist Fellowship, which is a much more, if I could put it this way, I think a more mainline Baptist tradition, you might say. In About the same time we did that, we started ordaining women to ministry and saying that no one should be denied the opportunity to serve God based upon their anatomy. Now, could we just extrapolate a little bit from there and say, once you've gone there and once you've lived for a quarter of a century watching the gifts of the Spirit in women operate in the church in ways that are beautiful, how big a leap is it really to say that not only should one's gender or anatomy not disqualify someone from serving the Lord, but also whom someone loves. All right? So over time, this was increasingly difficult for me, to be honest, as a pastor. I have tremendous regret, and I have had the need to apologize and to repent for the ways in which, as a pastor, in times past, I have counseled people who have come to me to bare their soul and talk to me about their same-sex attraction, and my counsel to them was that the best I could do was to tell them that God loved them, but that God had very clear requirements of how they expressed their sexual desire, and that the only possibility for them to please God would be to remain celibate. And the outcome of that counsel in the lives of people is a painful legacy that I've had to experience over time with people that are friends, some of whom I'm not in touch with any longer, but that sort of counsel is painful for me to remember. And over time, I have realized how audacious it is for me not to know the actual human experience of another person, and then to presume to know how they're to be responsible to God. If we're each of us responsible to God for ourselves, it's important for me to give that freedom and generosity to someone, and then to actually listen to them. So when we talk about a subject like this tonight, the first thing I need to really say is what I have learned is I'm not an expert on this. My gay friends should be actually at the microphone telling you what it means for them to be Christians and to love a person of the same sex. And the fact that I have been able to listen and learn from them has enriched my life in ways I can hardly begin to tell you. The friendships and appreciation I have for that privilege is really extraordinary. But people like me shouldn't pretend to be experts on other people's lives like that. And so we have to be careful about how we speak of it. Even sometimes language like, I'm not trying to be critical of our title tonight, Christianity and Homosexuality, but homosexuality itself sounds like it's sort of a disease or a syndrome, I think language like that is not something that my gay friends choose for themselves. And so one of the things we want to do is to sort of listen more than talk about how people want to describe their experience and then learn. The learning, in other words, is not only about studying texts. It's about dealing with real human beings. And when you consider the pain and suffering that gay and lesbian, bisexual, and transgender persons have experienced at the hands of the church across centuries, that pain is something that the church should be paying careful attention to. Because every time you read the Bible, you should realize that God hears the cries of those who are oppressed, who are marginalized, who are left out, and Jesus was always reaching out in kindness and saying those that religious leaders excluded should be included. All right, so in our church, what happened was a few years ago, something changed. Things have been changing on this subject for a long time, but they've picked up pace culturally, haven't they? So for many years, people would come to me and they would have their coming out moment with their pastor, and they would basically ask me for counsel of how do I deal with the fact that this is who I am, but I know it's wrong. Well, that changed a few years ago, where people would come to me and say, you know, I want you to know who I am, and I'm okay with that. How are you with that? You know, and then also, can you help me with my parents or some such thing? You know, right? And so, so I was paying a lot of attention to that. In fact, a few years ago, we had a period of about 18 months where 5 kids that grew up in our church came out to me. And they were just fine about, you know, acknowledging the fact that they were gay. One was bisexual, and you know, it was a new thing for me to understand. Now, all of these people, all of these were kids that I either had dedicated as babies, had baptized as, you know, teenagers. Sometimes, you know, I might have even married their parents. These were like, these are our kids, okay? So these are not them. These are us, okay? So that's another thing that we have to learn how to do, is to realize that we're all in this together. So that was happening at the same time as we were having a gay man in our church, a partnered gay man, was being nominated every year for 4 years to be ordained as a deacon. And I kept saying to the nominating committee, I know the people want this guy, and I love him too, and he has all the qualifications for a deacon, but the church has not had this conversation yet. It wouldn't be fair for us or to him to just say we're going to put him forward for nomination as a deacon, to ordination, if we haven't had the conversation, and then it all becomes about him, right? So I kept putting them off, and finally, the last year, they said, look, you know, we appreciate your pastoral authority in this, but the church gets to decide this, and we need you to start a process that will have us make a church decision about this, because the people need to understand they're already telling us what they want, okay? So the next thing that happened is, of course, the Supreme Court ruled on marriage equality. And now, you know, that was a game changer in certain ways, because it meant that the church, I as a minister, all of our staff ministers, and the church had to decide now for the first time whether we would abide by the law and marry anyone who came to us to be married, or we would claim a religious exemption in a sense and say we have every right to say no, to not marry anyone on behalf of the state. How are we going to decide that? And are we going to use our church facilities for same-gender marriages? So we had a lot of reason why we had to have this conversation. And so we initiated a process that took about 14 months. We had a 19-member study group, and we spent 14 months reading and talking and studying and listening to each other. And by the way, one of the things I learned about this is if you or your church decides to have this conversation, if at the end of that process someone agrees with the outcome, it was a good process. If they disagree, it's not really because of what the church decided. It's really how we went about that. You know, we just, and I've thought that there were probably 27 ways we could have gone about this, but honestly, every one of them would have ended up with a similar critique. Because in the end, the issue is the issue. And here's my contention. The issue is not the issue, because we're not talking about issues. We're talking about human beings who are created in the image and likeness of God, and who are loved like all the rest of us, who are given gifts by the Spirit of God that are to be used within the church, and who have every right to love and to serve alongside the rest of us. And that my sexual orientation is not the default position by which I get to determine somebody else's role in the kingdom of God. Okay? So, after all that study, the church made the decision. We proposed a majority report and a minority report, and the majority report prevailed. And the majority report simply said, we affirm our church's bylaws that all members have equal rights and privileges and responsibilities in the church. Done. We never said anything about sexuality or anything else. We basically said, same. If it applies to you, it applies to me, it applies to her, it applies to him. Okay? There's that. So that's the way we decided it. Now, if you talk to, people in our church who are still there and people who left after that, you will find that they don't all agree with what I just told you about the way we went about it or the way it was framed or anything like that. But look, it's a difficult matter. This is a really difficult thing to decide in churches, because let's be honest. I mean, the church has been for 2,000 years. It has had a majority position on this that is not this one. So we are taking a minority position. On the other hand, we actually have some Bible and history on our side for how things change from time to time. And so that gets me to the Bible. So the question everybody, always asks me about this is, well, what about the Bible? Isn't the Bible clear? Well, no. It's actually not. You can read the words, but the question is what they mean. You can read what the text says, but you have to read what the context is before you really understand the meaning of things. So there are 7 clobber passages in the Bible on this. Clobber passages, passages people use to clobber gay people over the head, about this. And look, I want to be honest and sincere and say that many people who read these passages see them as important words of how God wants people to flourish and not to be in damaging relationships. That is the way many people read this and want to say to their gay friends, I love you, but this behavior is contrary to God's will, and therefore I have to say these things to you because I want the best for you. Now, if you ask gay people that, they will not hear that as being kind and loving advice, generally speaking, because this goes to the very heart and soul of who they are as children of God. The capacity to have a relationship of love is part of the nature of our created being. And if you deny that to someone, that is a deep offense to their sense of personhood altogether. So these 7 passages, once you look at them very carefully, what you realize is that they all address certain things that many gay Christians agree with. That is, there are behaviors that are beyond the pale, that are things that embarrass gay people too. And many of these passages are addressing things that they would say, yeah, I agree with that. Well, you shouldn't do it. But that's not an ad hominem kind of argument, that when you read this and it says this, it means all gay people and all gay relationships. So then the question is, if each of those passages can be read as a judgment against a kind of pederasty of older men and younger boys, or of temple prostitution, male prostitution, or of a kind of excess of lust that goes beyond intimate, personal, covenantal relationships into a kind of promiscuity. If once you get past the reading of those texts in certain ways that say, plausibly these are not condemning all same-sex relationships, then you have to ask some other questions. Like, for instance, look, gay people have been around forever, so it's not like this is a modern phenomenon. When the Bible was written, there were gay people, okay? So sometimes in our attempt to want to say, look, this is a modern view of this, they didn't know about gay people back then. Well, they did, you know. But it is true that they viewed this as not being normal behavior. That generally speaking, in biblical times, not in Greco-Roman culture as much, but in the Hebrew and Christian tradition, it was viewed that this was contrary to the way God made people to be. But then the question comes, if we know today that people are constitutionally presupposed towards same-sex attraction, and that's not something they had access to, that information, then what do we do with that difference? For example, in biblical times, they believed that there was a three-tiered universe with the underworld beneath us and the earth that sat on pillars, and then the heavens above us. Well, there was no sense that there was the understanding of cosmology in the universe that we have today. Well, are we supposed to have a biblical worldview then and go back and say, forget about what satellites tell us and what, you know, science teaches us about the universe? No, we have to have this same vision of the way nature is. Well, then if we don't think that's necessary, then why do we think it's necessary when we begin to talk about the way human beings are constituted in their sexual orientation? So that would be another question to raise. Another thing that happens, though, is people go back to Genesis and they say, well, it's clear that God created Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. Have you heard that one? Yeah. Every gay person has heard that one, you know, in a tiresome way. All right. But here's the question. I don't want to suggest to you that any biblical writer would have imagined what I'm going to tell you now and say, oh, you know, that's really what I meant. But sometimes the things that are written that are inspired by God, what we can pick up on are some deeper truths about them that even those who wrote them wouldn't fully have understood. So, for example, when in Genesis chapter 2, it tells us that God made Adam from the dust of the ground, right? And then that God looked at him and, having created all the animals, realized that none of them were a suitable mate for him, right? And he said, God says, it is not good for the man to be alone. So God took a rib from the man, made the man fall asleep, made the woman, and when he wakes up and looks at her, what does he say? Does he say, oh my goodness, you are so different from me, now I find someone to love? No, he says, bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. You shall be called woman because you have been taken out of man. My argument is this. Almost everybody that wants to say Genesis says it's male and female, and that's what marriage is, and that's it, neglects the fact that, first of all, the motivation of God creating the partner was about companionship, not about sexual procreativity. The first question was about companionship. And when the woman is made from the man, the first thing he sees in her is that she is not like the animals. They are the ones who are different, that he couldn't have that level of intimacy with. No, he looks at her and says, you're me. You're like a mirror to me. Now, almost everybody that wants to use Genesis as an argument for only traditional marriage looks at that and says, it's got to be because of her difference, not because of her likeness. That's not the first thing that happens in the creation story. It's kinship that is crucial there. So, and then when you say that, and when you look at that and say, oh my goodness, there it is, then people say, oh, wait a minute, but then they can't have children, so how is the world going to go on if people have sex and can't have children? I'll bet there's a few of those folks in this room who are not gay, right? Who actually have no children and who are married, or who are older and married. So what do we do with that? Are you unbiblical because you couldn't have children? Is your love less because you couldn't have children? Because every time you have intimate relationships, it should be able to lead to the having of children. No, the point obviously is that God created male and female to move the species along, but that doesn't mean necessarily that we're supposed to have a world of only giraffes, or only mountain lions, or only oak trees, right? The diversity of creation is vast. So why not with humanity too? So I think you have to think through these things a little deeper. Finally, then, when you look biblically, you have to ask yourself, okay, even if you agree that the Old Testament was pretty clear about same-sex relationships being prohibited, what about in the New Testament? What happens with the early church? And here's what you see if you look at the book of Acts. The minute the church is born, the church has to start dealing with differences. And what will they do with the fact that these Gentiles want to be part of the church? It was only Jews before, and they had to be circumcised, and they had to keep kosher, right? So now all these Gentiles, a lot of us in this room, are here because the church sat down and said, let's read Scripture, but not stop there. And what the church did was it read Scripture in light of the resurrection of Jesus and the Holy Spirit being given, and said, you know, when we look at this person who believes in Jesus now, we see the genuine presence of God in their lives. So can't we accept them for that? And suddenly the church said, okay, Gentiles don't have to be circumcised and keep kosher, right? They can be in the church too. And so there was a council at Jerusalem that decided, how will we figure this out? And basically what they said is, Gentiles are in and don't have to become Jews in order to become Christians. Well, that was that decision, and they did put some limitations on about meat offered to idols and about sexual immorality generally, not same-sex issue specifically. But then the rest of the book of Acts keeps moving toward one traditional barrier of Old Testament practice falling one after another. So a eunuch who was not able to worship in the temple, but only in the outer courts, is now able to get baptized and be a full member of the church. This eunuch was not able to have children or to be married in a traditional way, and there is an analogy between that eunuch, I think, that we can find, and also persons of same-sex orientation. And so one barrier after another keeps falling as the church keeps saying, wait a minute now, I know what I've been taught, and I know what the Scripture says, but the Spirit of God is at loose in the world, and my goodness, I see the Spirit at work in this person's life. What am I going to do with this? And the more you look at the people you love, who are in your family and your church and the people you work with, and you see them as human beings created in the image and likeness of God, straight or gay, the question is the same. You know, who am I to make a difference between us about this? And so I think, you know, for me personally, it came to a point where I couldn't just say any longer, just be here, don't make trouble, don't talk about your sexuality. You can be here, and it's a don't ask, don't tell sort of policy. Because here's the thing. Too many gay people have suffered too much for too long. The suicide rate of gay youths is at least 4 times higher than straight. The percentage of youth runaways, 40% roughly of those who leave home and are on the streets are gay. That's just unacceptable. For the church to be okay with that is just not right to me. So for me personally, it came to a point where I couldn't look at myself in the mirror and continue to try to say, how can I keep the status quo? And say that I love someone, but. When you say I love you, but, the only thing the person hears is what comes after the but. Okay? So we made the decision we made, and it was painful, and it tore a lot of our friendships apart that we had for many, many years. And a lot of dear friends went to other churches as a result. The great news is there are a lot of churches for them to go to where they can feel comfortable. The other great piece of news is that there is a church now, a Baptist church now, where my gay Christian friends can come and be themselves fully and come to church and express their full lives and their identity and share the gifts of the Spirit with the church, not because they want to be different, but because they want to be the same. And that has been one of the greatest joys of my life in ministry, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. And I'm really happy to tell you that the church is strong and growing and happy, and we're not mad at each other, and we're not mad at the people who left. We bless them and hope that they have a great life and peace in who they are and how they serve God. But we really enjoy getting to meet and know and love new friends who love God, who believe in Jesus Christ, and who are serving alongside of us. And I just want you to know, it's a little bit, the image that I have of this is, you know, they said the test pilot Chuck Yeager, when he broke the sound barrier, many other test pilots had taken that plane right up to the edge of the sound barrier, and it had started shaking so much that they thought it was going to break apart and explode. And Chuck Yeager said, "I wonder if it's calm on the other side." And when everybody pulled back, he pushed the stick down, and it was calm on the other side. I'm telling you that life is good when everyone is welcome and loved and included. Okay, I think we're going to take a break. And if you have questions, please write them, and then we'll come back. Thanks a lot. Thank you.
One more round of applause for George Mason, everyone. Like he said, we're going to take a 10-minute break. During that time, we want to ask you to take that long form and please write down your question that you would like to ask Dr. Mason. Some of our staff on our leadership team for Pub Theology will be coming around with a basket that you can give your questions to and drop your raffle ticket into. If you would like to tweet in your questions, you can tweet at SMAADallas for your question, or you can hashtag Pub Theology Dallas. If you have any pictures or anything that you would like everyone to see, please use that hashtag Pub Theology Dallas. So we will take a 10-minute break. We have a question? The raffle tickets do not cost anything. So please fill out that raffle ticket, get it in there, and please fill out your question. Myself and some of the leadership will come around and collect those. We'll see you in about 10 minutes. Thank you. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Pub Theology, Pub Theology, to our Q&A session. And before we start the Q&A session, we just have a couple of thank yous, this being our last night and all, before we do our raffle. First of all, I just want to say that St. Michael's and All Angels loves you just as much as George Mason here. You don't have to switch churches. We love you too. Also, on your table, a very important form for us. It looks like this. This is a survey that we would love for you to take just 2 minutes to fill out. What you're going to see on there is a couple of topics that we're kind of throwing around maybe that you would be interested in hearing at the next Pub Theology, which we've had, I don't know about you, but round of applause if you've liked this event. Oh, thank you so much. We would love to come back next June, Monday nights in June, and do it again. So if you would fill out that survey, let us know what topics you would be interested in hearing that would help us plan for next year. Just speaking of our event, there are a few people that made this event happen. I'd like to have Ann Schmidt and Tish Vinsky and Ross Badgett and Father Bob Johnston please give a wave and please give them a round of applause. They've worked tirelessly on this. Thank you so much, guys. And also a big round of applause to Trinity Hall. Thank you so much for being our hosts. We love you, and please show them how much you appreciate them. Okay, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let us do the best raffle in Dallas. Okay, in order to do this, we're going to have to do this like I did the first week, and I've forgotten the past few weeks, so if you'll forgive me, but just like Christmas Vacation with Clark Griswold about to turn on the lights of his house, I'm afraid I'm going to need a drum roll, so let's hear it. Come on. There we go. The winner of the $50 Trinity Hall gift card picked completely at random is Sally Schuer. Hey, Sally. So I couldn't read the last name. There you go. Thank you. And without further ado, I'm going to give it back over to Dr. George Mason. Please give him a round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you. Wow, you have a lot of questions. Oh, my goodness. How long have you got? I know Bob said we got 20 more minutes, so we'll do our best. So let me see if I can get to them as best I can. I've had to be selective in figuring out what were consistent themes in all of this. So one of the questions is about how much I led the process in our church and how much I just invited the church to consider it and let it, pan out the way it did. And how would I have reacted if the church had decided the other way? Would I have stayed or gone? Okay, all of those are good questions. The answer to the first question is I was involved in the process and I was very clear about my position. That actually surprised some people who felt betrayed by me by taking such a strong stand about it in terms of my own view. I never told the church that I would leave if the church voted otherwise, but for me, this was a moral matter that I had to be clear about. It was not a neutral matter. It was not something that I thought, whatever the church decided was fine with me. It really wasn't, For me, this had come to a point of, this is life and death for people. To me, the gospel was at stake about this, and therefore, I had to be clear about my position, where I was, and if it went the other way, I would have been deeply disappointed. So I have to be clear about that. Now, so how to participate in a process where the leader is clear but doesn't get to make the decision, right? The church still had to make the decision. But those who lost felt that the deck was stacked against them because of my position. I've been there a long time, clearly, I wanted this to happen. Since it happened, I didn't play fair with the church in a congregational vote where everyone's vote is equal. I get the logic of that, and I accept the responsibility for it. And that's part of the problem in all of this, right? Look, so the alternative would be that I would say, I do have a strong feeling about this. I probably studied this more than you have, and more is at stake for me than for you, but I'm just going to be quiet. I can't do that. I feel like I have a calling, and I'm supposed to advocate for and defend the gospel, and to me this was something I had to do. That felt like a betrayal to some people. And I get it, and I accept it, and I'm sorry that it had to be that way. But I do think that being a leader sometimes is about a kind of faithful betrayal where you have to decide if you're going to be faithful to a vision of the gospel or what you believe is right, and that means that people who want to defend a status quo, you're going to betray them. Or you're going to be faithful to the status quo and you're going to betray what you believe is right. One way or another, it's going to be a faithful betrayal. So you got to decide, right? The next thing I would say is, I don't know what I would have done, but it would have been really hard to stay and be the pastor under those circumstances. My sense of solidarity with people that I love and care for, I don't think I could have done well just pretending that it didn't matter, or it mattered, but I somehow, I don't know what I would have done, but it would have been hard to stay. That's all I can say. And therefore, I'm also understanding of the people who left. I understand that it was hard for them to stay, but, one of my gay friends who is here tonight just, texted me something you need to hear. And I think, it's less a question to me than it is, I think, to a lot of people. He said, I guess my only question is, why is it so painful to do something you believe is right? As a gay person, I'm not so sure I'm comfortable knowing that Christians had to be convinced to love me. I'm not going to answer that. I'd like you to answer that, for yourself. But that's the perspective that you need to hear, about all of this. It is sometimes hard, but look, no matter how hard it was for me or for any of us to change our mind about something, think how hard it is to have felt your whole life like people looked at you as if you were someone wrong when you were made in the image and likeness of God. That's no pain we go through as straight people can compare to what that's like. So if you feel some pain and loss in relationships, and I did, all you're doing is tasting a little bit of the suffering of what people you love and care about have known at a much higher level. That's called Christian love. That's all that is, So, all right. What was our church's barrier to fully accepting gay people? I mean, look, I think a lot of it's tradition, but look, here's the thing. A lot of the people who had a hard time with this really believed that their position was rooted in a simple adherence to the faith as they had received it and to the Bible as it is written. And I grant them that that is what they believe. What I also believe they are not being completely honest about in reckoning with is how much the culture in which they are raised and the worldview that is reinforced by the echo chambers that they live in makes it difficult for them to think outside of the box about this. That is to say, look, I know there were people who left our church, who left the church not because they really personally disagreed with the decision, but because they couldn't tell their parents that they were in a church that was fully affirming of gay people. Or they couldn't tell their friends. They couldn't make a defense to their friends that their church had made this decision, even though they said to me personally, you know, I don't have a problem with it. I have a friend who was on the study group who told me one of his best friends in his professional life is gay, and that he hopes that he meets a man that he can marry, and that some church will marry him. He just doesn't want it to be his church. And then he looked at me and he said, I know that sounds hypocritical. I'm like, duh. You know, so again, people are wrestling with how to deal with this. Another one of the questions is, well, it's one thing to say that you are accepting of adults who are gay, but what about what you teach children in your church? What about what you teach youth? Are you concerned that you'll be teaching them that there is an alternative lifestyle that they might explore and consider? And here's what I want you to know. First of all, there are certain words that gay people want you to know are flash words for them. One of those is lifestyle. Okay? The gay lifestyle. Okay, here's what the gay lifestyle is for most gay people. They wake up in the morning and they make coffee and walk their dogs and drink their coffee and read the newspaper, and they go to work and they come home and watch TV and they go to sleep like everybody else. That's the gay lifestyle. Okay? They watch football on the weekends. Look, this is the point. The assumption is that language is that there's like a bathhouse to which everyone is going on the weekend. Okay? No, that's not. No one wants to be characterized by the worst examples of people in a group. As you would not want someone to say, you know, oh, you're one of those Norwegians. I know how those Norwegians are, right? Well, you wouldn't want to say that about Norwegian. If you don't want to say it about you, don't say that about the gay people either, okay? So that's one thing. The second thing is, you can't talk me into being gay. You can't entice me into desiring or wanting to be in a relationship with a man if that's not in me, okay? I can't speak for everyone, but my experience with other people is you are who you are, and God has made you this way. So the question is not whether you're going to be teaching someone that they have an alternative choice, but whether you are helping them understand how God has made them and that they are fully loved and accepted as they are, and they don't have to hide that. So part of what we are doing is simply treating people with honor and respect, no matter who they are, so that they don't grow up with this feeling of looking over their shoulder and feeling other people's contempt. There's the stories that gay people will tell you when they are honest with you about what it's like to have grown up in high school and to have not been able to express your affection for a person the way everyone else is, or of having to listen to jokes about being gay. Or of seeing someone who is more flamboyant, say, for instance, and saying, I see how they treat that person. I'm never going to let anyone know who I am. I mean, that is just painful. It's counterproductive. It doesn't help anybody. So, look, I'm not worried about educating people into being gay. I'd like to educate them into accepting who they are, loving as God made them to love, and asking them to live in the kind of covenantal faithfulness and responsible lives that everyone as Christians is called to live in. One of the beautiful things about marriage equality is now, for the first time, we have a chance to say everybody gets held accountable to the same standards. A lot of people have said to me, during this whole process in our church, okay, if you'll just take marriage off the table, then we'll go with you, we'll ordain gay deacons and all that sort of thing, but we just don't want our church performing gay marriages. Now, first of all, our church is not a sacramental church tradition, Baptist, so the building is not holy by itself, okay? So I don't really get that entirely to begin with. But secondly, if you say, look, we'll accept that gay people are together over here, we just don't want to know what they're doing, okay? Well, then you have a double standard. If you want one standard for straight people, you should have the same standard for gay people. Responsible sexual lives. That's all. And what's more, why shouldn't someone have the support and encouragement of the community in their relationship? That's what marriage represents. Marriage is not only about two people. It's also about the community strengthening and loving and supporting that relationship. And finally, it is also about not just the two of them, but the consecration of their relationship being offered up to God. So, don't we want the relationship of two people in covenant relationship to be something that is lifted up, that is a sacrament, that is offered up to God in some beautiful way as an expression of love? Isn't that what we should want for our work, for our families, for everything we do, to be a response to the love of God? To me it is, and to take marriage off the table is what it means is separate but equal again, and there's no such thing. Okay, we learned that with race, and it's true also with LGBTQ folk. There is no such thing as separate but equal. We're either all equal or we're not. And so, now you're getting George. I'm not trying to preach to the Episcopalians here. This is the Baptist preacher speaking here. And so some of you have said, well, if this is how you feel as a Baptist, and most Baptists don't agree with you, why are you still a Baptist? And I would say, because a great Baptist preacher named Carlisle Marney of a generation ago once said, being a Baptist is like finding yourself in a deep, slimy pit. You spend all your life scratching and clawing to get to the top so you can get out. And when you finally get your head above and look around, you see all these other pits where everybody else's head is, and you just drop down. We're all in the same boat, right? So I hope that I, as a Baptist pastor, and our church can give a good name to Baptists and say something good about the future of Baptists and encourage others to do that. I know you, St. Michael's folks, have been tremendous partners in so many ways in our community, and we thank you for that. And we'll be praying for you as you continue to wrestle with how to manage the I-30 corridor on this matter. I know it's difficult for some of you, and every denomination is wrestling with this. My son's mother-in-law is here with me tonight, and she's a member of a Methodist church in Oklahoma City, and her pastor and I were talking about this recently, and I'm talking with Bishop McKee about this in a few weeks, where everybody is wrestling with this in their denominations. But here's what I think. Some of the questions had to do with the Bible and how you read the Bible. Does it all come down how you read the Bible? A lot of it does. Is the Bible fixed, or does it give you a trajectory? Do you start thinking when you read the Bible, or do you stop thinking when you read the Bible? In John chapter 16, Jesus says, before he departs, he says, I'm going to give you the Spirit who will lead you into all truth. There are many things I could not tell you now because you could not bear them yet. But the Spirit will teach you all things. That suggests to me we don't know everything just by reading the Bible. But what we get is we get a conversation with Christians, with people of faith who lived long ago, who wrestled with similar kinds of things. And when we start with the Bible, we honor them. We take into account their lives, their reasoning, their thinking. Now, that doesn't mean that we do what they did. It means we honor them by listening to them and learning from them. Does everyone in this room do only what your parents did? I don't think so. But if you honor your parents, you will account for them and for their views. So I think that's what the church has to learn to wrestle with. There is a movement and a trajectory that I think God is moving us toward a greater peace and equality and freedom and justice in the world, and that it's up to us to be part of that movement. This is one part of that movement, a dignity of all persons and a freedom for them to love and express themselves fully with us. And so I'd like to suggest that the Bible is like an arrow that is being shot into the future. It's not an anchor, it's an arrow. Okay? And so I've got 2 minutes, and I don't know what the last question. Yes, I do know what the last question is. Okay. So someone has said to me that they have a Catholic friend who is devout and a gay child, and went to talk to a priest, and this didn't go well. It was difficult. And what should this person do? This is something we deal with in all of our churches, okay, because all of our churches are not settled on this matter yet. But here's what I would tell you. There's a Jesuit priest named Father James Martin. If you're on Facebook, you can find him, and I encourage you to go find him. He's doing beautiful work advocating for LGBT Christians in the Catholic Church. And in a recent video clip, he says he wants you to stay in church and be faithful and all of that, but he understands that if you can't, that you need to find a church where you can be welcome, where you can be fully, where you are fully loved and embraced as a child of God. And until such time, in his mind, as the Catholic Church is able to be that place, he says, first of all, try another parish, and if you have to, become a Baptist or an Episcopalian, is basically what he's saying. He didn't say Baptist because I don't think he believes that that's possible either, but But I think we want to all work toward that. Look, it's very painful to change churches because a lot of times people have been part of a church for many, 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 many years, and their families and their parents and all of that. And you want to be faithful to it, but there are these moral moments when you have to say, too much is at stake in the lives of other people. I believe that the gospel means God loves us all in Jesus Christ in an eternal and unending and unconditional way. And that the church's business is not sin management. It is profligate love. Inclusive, just, and consecrated love. And I hope that your church and my church and any of our churches would heed that and bear witness to that good news in Jesus Christ, and that our gay brothers and sisters will feel the joy of life in the church afresh because of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mason. And on behalf of Pub Theology, we want to thank you for joining us these 4 Monday nights in June. Please tell your friends about this event, and please join us next June every Monday night right here at Trinity Hall. We hope that is the plan. Please show Trinity Hall your love by tipping them well. If you don't have a place to call home on Sunday mornings, we would love for you to join us at St. Michael and All Angels. We have a contemporary and a traditional offering there, both at 9 and 11 o'clock. Dr. George Mason will be sticking around for a few minutes afterwards if you'd like to say hello or ask him another question. And if you would like to know what the official position of the Episcopal Church is on the issue that we talked about tonight, Father Bob is also sticking around and will be over here to answer any questions that you may have. So thank you again for joining us at Pub Theology. Good night, drive safely, and thank you.